Okay, so let's begin by davening that the zchut of our learning should help to bring back all the rest of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, bring an end to our war, and be an Ilui Neshama for my mother, Shlomo Leah Bas Menachem Mendel.
Amen.
So last time we started the sugya of Misha Chazo Bulmus, and I read into beginning of the Gemara, so we're going to go back and look at the Gemara, right? So the Mishnah begins with that issue, Misha Chazo Bulmus Machinoto Afil Dvarim Tmeim. So somebody who's sick with bulmus, which is a disease that makes one ravenous. And Rashi said, Misha Chazabulmus Chole Hoches Mechmat Rabon Enav Kehot V'hu Mesukan Lamut V'cheshemarito Chozeret B'yadu Hashem Mitrape. Okay, so he describes this. This is the issue that we need to understand as we're going into the Gemara. That bulmus is something that it's a sickness that takes hold of him because of hunger or starvation, and his eyes are dark or darkened, and he is in danger of dying. And when his appearance returns, then it's known that he's been healed. So Rashi introduces that because, of course, that's what the Gemara is going to talk about right away. Since the Mishnah said, until his eyes are lit up. So we can understand how Rashi knows that his eyes are darkened because while he's sick, his eyes have not been lit up. So that explains how Rashi knows that. And the next case we talked about is someone who's bit by a rabid dog. And there we have the machoka between the Tanakama and Rabbi Matya ben Charash. Tanakama holds that if someone's bit by a rabid dog, that we don't feed him from the chatzer kaved of that dog. Presumably, that was considered to be a cure, at least by some people. And Rashi said, "In machilino ton mechatzer kaved shelo afa pisheno agina rofim berefuazu." Even though this is what doctors are accustomed to using as a cure, it's not a complete refuah to permit him eating and to permit the isur of eating a behemat tmeya. And Rabbi Mati ben Charash is matir because he holds it is a refuah gemura. So this raised a question, though. The sheet of the Tanakama raises a question. Let's say it's not a refuah gemura. Why should we think that he might be matir anyway?
Because maybe he thinks it might work. It's even if it's partial or has some chance of success.
Why would we think that that would be permitted? That would override the isur of eating a behemat tmeya?
Because it might save his life, even if it's doubtful, no?
Right. Rashi says that according to the Tanakama, we don't feed him chatzer kaved. Why not? Because it's not refuah gemura. It's not a complete refuah. It's not clear what refuah gemura means, but let's say it doesn't completely cure him, or either means it doesn't completely cure him, or it may cure him, or it may not cure him. So maybe in either case, the Tanakama holds that's not enough to be matir the isur of eating a behemat tameya, like Caliph. But I would pose to you, I think we mentioned this last time, maybe not, but I think we did. Why would I think why would I think that in any event I might give him the Chatzer Kaved, even if it's
It,
not?
wouldn't it be a case of Sefek Nefashot?
Yes, it's a case of Safek Nefashot. And what's our general rule of Safek Nefashot?
Sefek Nefashot Hakel, the
Okay,
rule alien.
so so this needs, I think, then further discussion. So why would the Tanakama not allow him to have the Chatzer Kaved, even if he doesn't think it's a
Mhm.
Rufuah Gemara? Maybe it would work,
Yeah, it's good enough.
or
Yeah.
or maybe it's enough to keep him stable. So we said, so what's Rufuah Gemara? So either means that it's not going to completely cure him. Okay, maybe it partially cures him. Rashi already explained that ulmus is something that can lead to death. So maybe anything I can give him that will stave off death because of Safek Nefashot Lakel, I should be Mekil. And Rabbi Mati ben Harash's Matir Rashi explains Kasavaru Fuagmurahu. Or he holds that it is a Rufuah Gemura, and so therefore, of course, he's going to give it to him. But even according to the Tanakhama, it's a Safek, you should also give it to him. So this is something that we're going to have to examine separately. We'll examine this later. The rest of the Mishnah, Choshesh bigrona matilin lo sam betoch piv b'Shabbat, bimnei shehu safek nefashot v'chol safek nefashot docha et Shabbat. So the person who has some kind of a feeling of, sick feeling in his throat, we give him an herb or a drug in his mouth on Shabbos because that's safek nefashot, d'chol safek nefashot d'chol Shabbat. So these things I think still need to be fleshed out more. We'll see what the Gemara has to say. And then we have the case of Mishnah Flalab Mapolet, and we're gonna come back to this later. The Gemara will come back to this later. So this is what we looked at last time. Gemara Tanu Rabbanan. So, but let's read through this again. Uh, Hold on, make it a little bigger. Okay, you can read Tanu Rabbanan.
Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, Menayin Hayu Yodim Shahayiru Einav, Meshivchin Bein Tov Lara. Amar Abai, Uvtama.
Okay, so what does all that mean?
So the rabbis teach, from where do we know that, how, or, from where do, from where do we know that his eyes are lit up? From his ability to distinguish between good and evil. Abai says from the taste.
Okay, so we understand. So the Breita here is coming to fill out our Mishnah, because our Mishnah said that we feed him, a person who has a bull moose, we feed him even Dvarim Tameim, Ad She'oru Einav. Right? So now the Gemara is asking, the Breita is saying, so from where would I know? In other words, how would I know uh, that his eyes have lit up? So the Bright itself answers, Mishyavchin ben tov v'ra. From the time he can distinguish between good and bad. I'm going to use bad instead of evil.
Oh, okay.
Okay, because of a bite. From the time he can distinguish between good and bad. And so what does that mean? that he can distinguish between good and bad.
Could be anything.
So, right, right. It seems also not to be that helpful. Amar Abaye uv'ta'ama regarding taste. And Rashi explains, so you're the only one here. You can read more. Amar Abaye.
Amar Abai v'ta'ama mishiodei lahavchin ben tam tavshil yafe letavshil ra. So one that knows to distinguish between a good food and bad food. Or,
Yeah. And I should just point out, Mishiodeh is a time. It's from the time he knows.
okay.
In other words, so when do we feed him? When do we feed him? We feed him until when do we feed him? We feed him enough, so ad she'oro enough. And now, and then the Braita says, what does it mean? How do you know that his eyes have lit up? It's when he can distinguish between good and bad. And Abaye says, the time he can distinguish between the taste of a good piece of cooking to a bad piece of cooking, which seems somewhat arbitrary, although certain where it loses entirely the sense of taste. It's a real condition. Can you still hear me?
I just lost you for a
Uh-oh.
little bit.
Hello?
It's like stuttering, like almost.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because I got a little message here that my internet is unstable. Okay, but okay, so the Mishnah calls this Achi Oru Einav until his eyes light up. So why didn't the Mishnah just say from the time he can taste, he can taste properly? So I don't know. It's just an interesting point to make that it could be that this idea of the eyes lighting up, that might have been something that doctors at the time of the Mishnah,
Yeah,
or maybe even non-doctors at the time of the Mishnah, that's something that they could recognize. And then
yeah,
later generations didn't know how to make that distinction. And so the Braita says, Mishavchin ben tov v'ra, and Abaye has to explain, it means that, this person gets a proper sense of taste, and that will indicate if their eyes lit up or not. It's just an interesting thing because nowadays, um, doctors will still look for visible symbols,
yeah,
symptoms, right? They'll still look for the
yeah.
visible symptoms, but they'll rely more, I would say they tend to rely more on other things like blood exams and EKGs and all kinds of things like that. My brother actually just got out of surgery yesterday for a broken arm. Was a
Right,
very complicated thing. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Before Shlema. Right?
He had a prosthetic in his arm from a few years ago, and then his bone
Mm.
cracked, and it was a whole thing. And he told me before he went in, he himself is a doctor. He told me before he went in that they won't know until they're all the way in if there's any sign of infection.
Right.
That is, usually we have, so this is what I mean about outer indications like symptoms. So we know what the symptoms of infection are. It tends to be fever. There may be other things, but say fever is one. So the fact that he didn't have fever, though, the doctors knew that was good that he didn't have fever, but it didn't necessarily mean
Yeah,
that there was no infection because you could still have the infection without that symptom. So fortunately, they went in. They found there was no sign of infection, so they're able to complete the surgery properly. And God willing, he'll be okay in I don't know, at least a few weeks. I think he'll need
Mhm.
for recuperation. Uh, so yeah, obviously that's been on my mind, but it seemed appropriate to mention it here. Okay, so okay, now here's Michael Werner. Okay, we'll let him come in. And now, well, I'll give him a second to connect. Yeah, and there we are. Hi, Michael. So
Uh,
we just did a little bit of a recap with a little more in-depth recap of the beginning of the Mishnah, and we're going to continue on in the Gemara. But so basically, though, what we said, we read the Mishnah that said talked about the person who had the pulmus, and that the din is we feed him even dvarim tmeim ad shi'e oru enav until his eyes light up, and then we reread this Gemara that the Gemara brings a brighta. From where do we know that his eyes have lit up? In other words, how would we know that? So the question on the face of it is a little strange because since it was given as a symptom in the Mishnah, we would have thought this is something that one should be able to recognize by looking at somebody. But apparently wasn't so clear what this means when somebody's eyes light up. And so the brightest is actually it's from the time he can distinguish between good and bad. And Abai explains what does it mean between good and bad? But ta'ama in taste. And Rashi explains it means from the time he can distinguish between something that tastes good and something that tastes bad. And so that once he can, so apparently with bull moose, it would seem that somebody loses their sense of taste. And once their sense of taste is restored, then you would stop feeding them. And that would be Achi Oroinav. But of course, it's a funny kind of thing because it's now where we seem to have drifted away from the original criterion, which is until you feed him until his eyes light up. And now we've defined his eyes lighting up by completely different criterion, that is his sense of taste. But be that as it may, I mentioned it could be that the idea that somebody's eyes light up, maybe that was actually a visible symptom that doctors of an earlier generation knew how to distinguish. But later on, maybe that was lost, but it was known that it was associated with this issue of sense of taste. In any event, so that's what we have. But the other bit that we get from that part of the Mishnah is this idea that somebody who has bulmus, we feed him even dvarim tmeim, even dvarim tmeim. So now we want to look into that. So now Michael Werner, you can read Tanu Rabbanan.
Tanu Rabbanan. מי שאחזו בולמוס, מאכלים אותו הקל,
Hakal, hakal.
okay, הקל, right, point. תבל ונבלה.
Keep going. Tevel nevela.
Where are we there? Oh, מאכלים אותו נבלה, תבל ושביעית. שביעית, תבל ותרומה. תנאי, דתניא. מאכלים אותו תבל, מאכלים לו אותו תבל, I've just lost my place. When you... Okay, yes, right. ואין מאכלים אותו תרומה. בן תימה אומר, תרומה ולא תבל.
Stop. Okay, so that's actually two brightot. So So what's this bright about? Misha chazo bulmus machilinoto hakal hakal. What does that mean? Hakal hakal.
Meaning that I'm assuming that we roll leniently in terms of where forbidden foods are concerned.
No, that's not what hakal hakal means. That's what you say is true, right? Because the Mishnah told us that Misha chazo bulmus. What's the din? What do we feed him?
Um,
I just repeated this twice.
okay.
Misha chazo bulmus machilinoto. What?
Afilu devarim tameim.
So what does that mean?
We feed him even foods that are tameh.
Okay,
Even
and
foods,
as opposed to what?
foods that are tahor. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so and we mentioned last time, Dvarim Tameim, in this context, it means what we would call broadly kosher and not kosher. That is, we should explain this. That hold on, Paul is connecting. Paul is returning from a doctor's appointment. So we'll give him a second to connect. Hi, Paul. Can you hear us?
Hi. Yes,
Hi.
I do. Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
Uh,
So listen, you missed the beginning, but that you can listen to that later. We're going
yeah.
now, and this part of the Gemara. So we're looking at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Misha chazo bulmus, machilino tofilu dvarim tmeim." So I'm just discussing first of all, what do we mean by dvarim tmeim? And so I explained that what the Mishnah here means is foods that are forbidden to eat. It's lav dafka food that's tamei per se, because there is no Isur in the Torah for you or me to eat food that's tamei. The only Isur regarding that would be if you're a Kohen, you're not allowed to eat, and you eat truma, you're only allowed to eat truma tahora. And truma that's tamea actually has to be destroyed, has to be burnt.
There is orla. You can't
Or,
fruit.
but that's no. I'm saying that's not davar tameh. There are a lot of things that you and I aren't allowed to eat. There's a whole long list of things that you and I aren't
Yeah.
allowed to eat.
Yes.
So I'm
Okay.
just pointing out that dvarim tameim per se, things that we call actually tameh, there is no isur in the Torah to eat dvarim tameim generally, right? No one's allowed to eat truma tameya, not even a kohen. No one's allowed to eat truma, but that's because, first of all, you and I aren't allowed to eat truma, even if it's tahor, because we're not kohanim. But in general, let's say, the food that you eat, you don't have to eat b'tahara. And it could be tamei and all if for all kinds of reasons, but there's no reason not to eat it. So my point is that here in the Mishnah, when it says field varim tameim, it means generally any food that the Torah prohibits us from eating. In other words, it's a generic term here. It doesn't necessarily mean tamei per se, right? Lav dafka tamei, but dvarim
So it's also for
asurim.
things which are not kosher.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Right? And then we saw this, right? Because we said we had the example of somebody who was bit by a rabid dog that, according to the Tanakama, we don't feed him mechatzer kaved, which is obviously asur because the dog that it would come from is a behemat tameya. So tamei in that sense means, an animal that one is not allowed to eat. So here also, in any event, so now Michael Werner just read this part where the mission is expanded upon by this Braita. The Braita says, Misha chazo bulmus machilino to hakal hakal. let me just make one other point just to remind us. So when the Mishnah says "Machilinato afilu dvarim tameim," it doesn't mean that we go out of our way to feed him something that's not kosher. But what does it mean?
If that's the only thing available, you're allowed to.
If that's what
we allow him to eat.
yes, we allow. So there, we can imagine two circumstances. One is either it's the only thing that's available, and that's why we're allowed to feed it to him. What would be another circumstance that it would be permitted?
He's actually specifically asking for that food.
Well, it's interesting you say that because here in Misha Chazo Bulmus, we don't. You see, the Mishnah doesn't consult him. In other words, this is unlike the person who's hungry, who on Yom Kippur, where we do listen to that person. His opinion matters in that case. But somebody who's achazo bulmus, we don't have any indication that his opinion is relevant. So what's another circumstance, though, that I might give him a davar tameh?
We've given him a devarim tehorim, and they haven't had any effect. And so,
Okay, to put that another way, yeah, I agree with you. In other words, to put that another way, either we gave him Dorim Tahorim and it didn't have any effect, or we know Lechatchila that the way we're going to cure him has to be through a Davar Tameh. And that's like the example in the Mishnah, that in the case of the person who's bit by the Kelev Shoteh, that the Tana Kama says you don't feed him mechatzer kaved of the dog, and Rabbi Matya says no, you do. Right? In other words, that's dafka what you feed him. So the two circumstances, broadly speaking, that where you would give somebody a davar tameh is either there's nothing else for him to eat and he needs to eat, or what we're going to feed him is considered to be a refuah, even though it's a davar tameh. Okay, so now this Braita is going to discuss what? Misha chazobulmus v'achuyuno hakal hakal. So what's hakal hakal?
I would say little by little.
You would say that, but you would be wrong. But that was a good guess. So I mentioned I read this quickly last time at the end of the shir, so I don't expect that everybody remembered. But the idea of hakal is I'm going to give him that which is less, or let's say uh, more permitted, or less asur is actually the way of putting it. I'm going to give him the less asur thing first. So, and then it brings examples. Tevel unevela, machilino to nevela. So what does that mean?
that if we have two things available, tevel and nevela, we start with nevela because it is less tameh, as it were.
Okay, so now the question is: so what do we mean by less? What makes it lighter? What makes it kal vis-a-vis
I'm
tevel?
assuming that there is a lesser punishment for eating it.
That would be a very good assumption, and we'll look at that in a moment. So let's assume that. Let's go with that. That hakal, in other words, they're different. All of the tafil and nevela are both asur, but one of them is kal and one of them is chamur when I compare them. And what do I mean by kal and chamur? That one has a lighter punishment and one has a heavier punishment. So now we can say machilina to hakal. I'm going to feed him the one that has the lighter punishment. So even though he's not going to be punished for eating this, why won't he be punished for eating this?
This is kuch nefesh.
It's pikuach nefesh. So for pikuach nefesh, dochin et kol Torah kula, right? Except for the big three isurim. So I know that he's not going to get punished. So why do I feed him hakal hakal? Why do I feed him the one that has the lesser punishment? What difference does it make?
Well, there seems to be a gradation in the Isurim,
Yeah, there is. And
which
so,
is proportional to the punishment.
right. So what if, but
So
if
there are
I'm,
things which are more asur than others.
okay, well, actually, I know. So you're laughing, but that seems to be the indication. In other words,
Yeah.
once I say that he's allowed to eat davar tameh in order to save his life, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to that I'm ani matir lo akol. It's not that the Torah has now made all of these things permitted to him. This I mentioned this a long time ago in a different shir in a different context, but this is the difference between saying that, let's say, pikuach nefesh is doche the Torah. It pushes away the Torah. It's not matir the Torah. There's a and this is an example of the difference. Michael Werner, what's the difference?
Um,
Did you hear what I said?
yes, I guess. So yes, so when
So
you
what's
said
the difference between pushing
one
away?
doche and one's matir.
Okay. So what's the difference practically between saying I'm doche the Torah or I'm matir the Torah?
So in the first instance, um, the in the first instance, pekuach nefesh mitigates the violation of the lo taseh, and in the second one, it's actually also exculpates. So when we say doche, it mitigates. It's
You're giving
mitigate the
me a
whole.
nice definition, but what's the practical difference? What's the halachic difference? What's practically different between those two scenarios?
I guess that if it's
You don't
doche.
have to guess. We just said it.
Okay. I know. I'm sorry.
Don't guess.
Um, if it's doche, maybe it's sort of the sort of becomes
Michael Schwartz, can you say what's the difference?
Doche, it's temporary. It's just you're overriding temporarily. Where matir is, it sounds like you're just completely ignoring it.
So it's not so much a temporal issue, but here what it this is exactly the example that we just gave. Machilino to hakal hakal. So what's an example? I have tevel and I have nevela. So if that's my choice, I give him nevela, and that's an example of being doche that we're doche the Torah mipnei pikuach nefesh. If I was matir mipnei pikuach nefesh, what would the psak be?
You could feed him anything.
you feed him anything at all.
You can give him anything. So here I see that the Torah, because of all the things that you said and that Paul said, that there's a gradation in the Isurim. I do see there's a gradation in Isurim. It's measured, at least one way of measuring it is by the punishment that's assigned to that Isur. But so because of that, I understand that there's going to be a pecking order, which I will go through if I have a choice and give him a person who needs to eat in order to save his life. I'm going to give him that which is less asur. If we were matir the Torah, if the Torah is hutra, if it was mutar to do anything to save somebody's life, then I wouldn't hesitate to give him whatever either one. It wouldn't matter. And this idea of hutra comes in other contexts, but here, when by pikuach nefesh, we see pikuach nefesh is doche, so it pushes it away, but it doesn't get rid of it, right? So it's still there. I'm pushing aside what I need to push aside in order to save somebody's life. So then we go ahead.
I thought that if you, in the case of pikuach nefesh, you have a mitzvah to help the person, to save the person. It's not, even if you do something which in normal circumstances is forbidden, it's really, it's a positive mitzvah. You must save him.
Yes, that's true. But what's your question?
So there is no, in that case, ein avera. It's not that you push away an avera. It's just not an avera, because you must do it.
Okay, so what you're saying is true, and actually, I think we talked about this maybe a little bit before you came, but okay, let's go through that. So it means that yes, when someone's life is at stake, then it's up to you or even the person themselves, if they're capable, but anyone around, to save that life. And in order to save that, and that is a mitzvah, right? That's something you're commanded to do. And they're different, it's based on different psukim. There are different explanations about why, but bonagid, everybody agrees it's something you have to do. But what we understand is that's true. But that imperative to save someone's life is doche the Torah. It pushes it aside, meaning that what I'm going to do in order to save their life now becomes that it's what you said before is actually mituyak. There will not be an avera if I'm machalel Shabbat, or if I give him or if he eats a davar tameh, there will not be an avera. But there's a difference between saying that and saying that anything goes. Hakol mutar. So it's not that it's mutar. It's not that I have what does mutar literally mean? It means undone, right? You're matir asuri matir. You're matir a kesher, right? If you have a knot, when you open it, you undo it, right? Heter means that you've undone. So I haven't undone everything. There's still a structure in place, and if I have a choice, I will do the least avera. I'll do the least violation in order to save that person's life. Kol zman that it won't affect the outcome. In other words, here it says tevel and nevela. So what's our assumption? Those are the foods that I have in front of me right now. So I can take either one, but it doesn't mean tevel and nevela, the machinut and nevela doesn't mean that if I have tevel and I could get nevela, that I go out and get nevela. No, because maybe he needs to eat right now. So yeah. So anyway, no, but it's a very good point. It brings, I think what you said brings it more into the bigger picture. So there is an imperative to save someone's life. And when I come to save their life, then I'm going to, when possible, I will do the least amount of averot in order to save their life. And yeah. Okay, very good. So now, of course, we wouldn't want to. So right. So Michael Werner said, "Go
This
ahead."
may be problematic because maybe you have to be very quick. You can't think about all these points, and you have to do it quickly. So
yes,
to
right.
introduce another shikul, maybe it's not. It's dangerous.
So I think
it might be dangerous.
I think you right. So you make a good point, and that of course is going to be that will be brought to bear. In other words, again, relevanti, right? If you have to make a split-second decision and maybe, maybe you're there and you have Tevil and you have Nevela in front of you, and all of a sudden you don't remember which is more kal. You're not going to run and open up the Shulchan Aruch to find out. You're going to feed him something right now. So this is what we get. What we're going to get from this sugya is, it is going to, it's going to teach us maybe two things. So broadly already, it's taught us this idea that when we violate the Torah to save somebody's life, we try to violate it in the least way, in the least Avera affected way. But then the other thing is it's going to tell us, we're going to learn more specifically about differences between these different Averot and what they are. So let's continue. So we have so in the Mishach Hazobulmus Machinot Kal Kal. And as we said, I think last week or the week before, whenever we started this sugya again, this is brought. Our mission is brought in the context of Yom Kippur. But what I understand, because the mission doesn't go out of its way to say this is only on Yom Kippur, or logically it means anytime. Anytime somebody yesh lo bulmus, and I have to feed him. And maybe, as Paul is indicating, maybe there's an urgency in feeding them right now. So whether it's even if it's Yom Kippur, I'm going to feed him Dvarim Tmeim. Even though what? Even though now now he's going to he's dealing with the Avera of eating on Yom Kippur, and on top of that, he's dealing with the Avera of eating a Davar Tameh. And so so the psak is you give him the lesser of whatever the Avera is. So with Tevel and Nevela, I feed him Nevela. So okay, so let's get to definitions. What's Tevel and what's Nevela? We mentioned this last week, but we can do it again. What's Tevel and what's Nevela?
So tevel is produce that hasn't had any of the matanot, truma, maser, and nevela is an animal that's not slaughtered properly, not kosher in that respect.
Right. Okay, so Tevel is produce that hasn't had matanot kahuna taken from it. It also includes challah, but also trumot and maser. It's most commonly used in regards to trumot and maser, and sometimes it's used in other contexts. So, and a nevela, yes, it's an animal. We should add in, it's a behemat tahora. In other words, a nevela is going to be a behemat tahora. It's an animal that, if slaughtered kosher, you would be allowed to eat, but it was not slaughtered kosher. Either was improperly slaughtered, or it died of old age, or of sickness, or any other reason, other than shlita kshera. So those are the two things I have in front of me. So if it's tevel and nevela, so I'm supposed to choose the nevela. Tevel u'shvi'it, shvi'it. So what does that mean? What's the whole
Tevel and Tevel versus food versus produce that was harvest that comes from the Shemitah.
Okay, so what is it asur to eat things that come from Shemitah year?
No, I mean one can go out and gather it, but it is food that is. I mean, I guess we produce that was not. Produce that was not that everyone did not have access to. I would guess,
It's an interesting guess. It's not exactly true. Michael Schwartz, you remember I mentioned last week what
Yeah, I
this
remember
is.
you mentioned last week. It's produce that's Biur, that it was eaten after the time of Biur, produce from the seventh year that was eaten after the time of Biur. Is that correct?
That
You know,
yes, that is correct. So here, by the way, I just remembered now. There were two. This is a sidebar. There were two issues that came up last week. I said I'll try to address them this week. So one of them was Ein Mazal Yisrael that Paul and I were talking about. I wanted to show you the makor for that. If we have time, I'll do it at the end. Otherwise, bleed nether, I'll do it next time. And the other one was the other issue was this issue of saving a non-Jew's life as opposed to saving a Jewish life. And that altogether, I'm going to wait on because it will come up later in the Gemara. Okay, that's just a mental note that I said out loud. So, um, 1 second. I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you these different issues. If I here we go. Okay, does everybody see this Rambam Hilchot Shmita v'Yovel? Okay. I'm just going to read this. This is Rambam Hilchot Shmita v'Yovel, Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph, Perot Shvi'it. Right, the fruits, in other words, any of the produce that's grown during Shemitah year, ein ochlin mehen ela kol zman shoto hamin matsui basadeh. We don't eat from that produce except all the time that that same species is still found in the field. Shneamar v'livhem techa uchaya asher ba'artzecha. This is a pasuk in regarding Shemitah, and it says that for your domesticated animal, for the wild animal that's in your land, all of the produce should be for them to eat. And what's the drasha? Kol zman shechaya ochelet mimin ze min hasadeh, ata ochel mima shebabayit. As long as the wild animal eats from that species in the wild, in the field, you can still eat it in your home. Kala l'chaya min hasadeh, if this has now been finished off, in other words, there is no more of this produce in the field anymore for the wild animal to eat, chayav leva'eroto, you have to destroy it. Min habayit, you have to destroy it from your house. V'zehu biur shel perot shvi'it. That's what we mean when we talk about biur perot shvi'it. So this is after Shemitah, and maybe you picked a lot of dates, and dates last for a very long time. Or maybe you picked grapes and you made wine, and wine can last for years. But once the season for the grapes or the dates is over, and if you go out into the field, you will no longer find those species from Shemitah year. Whatever you have left over, you have to destroy. Just also as a sidebar, the way we hold practically is that this gets into Machlokas Rishonim and whatnot. We don't have to go into it. But what we hold is biur in this sense could also include being mafkir. You're allowed to give up ownership of it entirely, and then somebody else can take it from Hefker and eat it. And if nobody takes it from Hefker, after you were mafkir it, you can repossess it and then eat it. But there is this idea that there's a process you go through. In any event, in our Gemara, where we're talking about Shvi'it, so this is what the Gemara means by Shvi'it. This would be the Davar Asur, the Davar Tameh. If I have Tevel on the one hand, and I have Shvi'it, meaning I have Perot Shvi'it achar zman biur, then I give him the shvi'it.
What is Otsar Beit Din?
Otsar Beit Din, okay,
We
I'll
have
just,
this sometimes. I don't remember exactly.
yeah, no, so Otsar Beit Din is a concept which it's pertinent to this, that it's one of the ways that you can get that you can continue to eat perot shvit after zman beur. According to some rishonim, what you do is you bring all of the perot to the Beit Din, and then Beit Din holds on to it. Beit Din has the power to be mafkir anything. It's
Yeah.
to be lafkir, right? To dispossess, to dispossess of something of ownership. So you can bring the perot to Beit Din, and they can say now nobody owns it, and because in other words it has no actual ownership, and because of that, now it would be permitted to eat. That's a very quick and dirty explanation of Otsar Beit Din. That it goes into their cash, into their treasure house, as it were, into their Otsar, into their warehouse, and then they can distribute it to whomever they see fit to distribute it to. But for our purposes, I don't want to get bogged down into that. For our purposes, we have this idea of Tevel, which we've already defined, and we have Shvi'it, and all we need to know about the Shvi'it for the moment is that we're talking about Perot Shvi'it after Zman Beur. So if I have those two things in front of me to feed him, then I'm going to give him Shvi'it. So what are
Shame, that is strange. So this fruit is forbidden. It's not an immanent criterion. It's not that the fruit in itself is forbidden, but it's history which is important. Something like
it's
this.
it's time bound. It's well, we have another example of something that's time bound like that, which would be chametz on Pesach, right? You can have an isa,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
And for a certain amount of time, it's mutar, but if you let it go too long, it's asur. You could say it's a parallel thing here also. It's not exactly this. I'm not saying exactly the same, but sometimes time does indicate whether something is mutar or asur. So the
No, it's
perot,
not. No, it's not only the time. You say that if you mafkir את זה, okay? And then you take it back,
that
then it's
that's a
okay. So
that's
it's
a
the procedure which is important, and not the thing in it, not the, the,
what
the,
what I
the, the
no, but
substance in itself.
so it's okay. Look, it's not the substance of, but I would also say the proceed. First of all, I want to explain. Not everybody holds this idea that you can be zochem in a hefker. So I just want to point out the main point is that there is a time when the peirot of Shvi'it, which were mutar l'chalutin, right? They're completely mutar. The Torah says that everybody can eat them, but at a certain point in time, they will become asur. Whether or not you can make them mutar again, right. That's this question, but for us it's not for us it's not right now relevant, but in terms of so yeah, but the substance of the thing, what it's interesting you say this because it is important, because this is exactly what I wanted to get back to. So what are the things that we've mentioned so far that are dvarim tameim? We have tevel and nevela and shvi'it. Those are the three things that we've mentioned so far. And so I've put Tevel versus Nevela, and I have Tevel versus Shvi'it. And now the Gemara is going to ask another one, Tevel u'Truma. What if I have Tevel and I have Truma? So what's the problem with Tevel? You're not allowed to eat Tevel. What's the problem with Truma?
You're also not allowed to eat it. It's dedicated to the Kohen, given to the Kohen.
Okay, so so it means that we're talking about truma, and that of course only a kohen is allowed to eat truma, and the person who has the bulmus presumably isn't a kohen. So what? So now what's naihi? So Paul, why don't you read Tanaihi?
Oh, Tanaihi, you hear me?
Yes.
No. Okay. Tanaihi דתניא, מאכילים אותו תבל, ואין מאכילים אותו תרומה. בין תמה אומר, תרומה ולא תבל.
Okay, so that's the brisa.
There's a מחלוקת here.
So that's what when the Gemara said Tevil Truma. This is a kitsur for a question. In other words, until now, right? I'm going through pairs of machalim asurim, right? So now I come to Tevil Truma. So the Gemara is asking a question. What if I have Tevil and Truma? Which should I feed him? So the Gemara says Tanaihi. Tanai means that it's a machloket Tanaim. It's something that's given over to the Tanaim to discuss. Ditanya, and we learn in the Braita, just like you said. So the Tanakama says, if you have Tevel and Truma, Tanakama says you give him the Tevel and you don't give him the Truma. Ben Tema says the other way, you give him Truma and not Tevel. So let's read it. So what's their machloket about? Why are they disagreeing? So read a little further. Amar Rabbah.
אוקיי. אמר רבא, היכא דאפשר בחולין. דכולי עלמא לא פליגי דמתקנינן לי ומספינן מספינין מספינן לי כי פליגי בדלא אפשר בחולב.
Bechulin.
Bechulin.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't understand.
No, I know. I know you don't understand what you're reading, but read a little bit further.
It's reminds me when I was in Chutz La'aretz, and even the Hebrew I didn't understand. I read it without understanding what I read.
So here you've been in Israel all these years, and now you're reading this, and you feel like you're a student again, which is okay.
Yeah, something like this, yes.
Mashu, okay. Mar Savar.
Mar Savar Tevel Chamur. Umar Savar, it's another Mar. Tuma Chamura. Mar Savar Tevel Chamur. אבל תחומה חזייה לכהן.
Read a little more. Yeah, keep going. I'll tell you when to stop.
ומר סבר תחומה חמורה, אבל תבל אפשר לתיקוניה.
לתיקוני. Okay, I'll stop you here. So here, let me help you. So we have this Braita, and the Braita says, when it comes to Tevel and Truma, we have a machloket, where Tanakama holds that if you have to feed somebody a davar asur, and you have only Tevel and Truma, and the person is not a Kohen, you give him Tevel and you don't give him Truma. What's the difference between, so what's the practical difference between Tevel and Truma? Tevel, we already defined, is produce which had no trumot masrot taken from it. What's truma, by contrast?
That's the portion of the food that goes to the Kohen.
Okay, so tevel is before any of the halachic processes have been done, right? It's nothing, no matanot have been taken. Truma is the end result of that process. It's the other end where we have taken it. We've removed the truma,
but it's reserved for the Kohen.
But it's reserved for the Kohen. So Abaye, I'm sorry, Rabbah says, Rabbah wants to understand what's the basis for the machloket between the Tanakama and Ben Tema. So he says, I'll just translate the words. Amar Rabbah, when it's possible with chulin, the kule alma lo plige, dimatkaninan le umaspinan le. So whenever it's possible to give chulin, so what's chulin?
That's food that's not truma. Or
Right. Okay, yeah, it's food. So it's going to be, in our case, we're talking about produce. So we'll say produce that is not designated for the Kohen, meaning anyone can eat it. But what? So what does he mean? He's saying everybody agreed. The entire world does not disagree. In other words, everyone agrees. That I fix it, meaning we're talking about chulin that's tevel. Chulin that has not yet been fixed. It hasn't had trumot and masrot removed. So he says, okay, if you have chulin that's tevel, you have chulin that's tevel. Nobody disagrees that what you do is you take the trumot and masrot, umasfinan le. We feed it to him. That's what we'll give him. Nobody disagrees. Ki plige bidolo efshar b'chulin. When are they arguing? They're arguing when it's not possible to give him the chulin. Why would it not be possible to give him the chulin? Maybe maybe it's Shabbat. Maybe it's so you're not allowed to take trumot and masrot on Shabbat. Or maybe, as Paul indicated before, maybe it's just a matter of urgency. I have to feed him right now. So for whatever reason, it's not possible to give him the chulin after the trumot and masrot have been taken. So that's the machoket. Mar savar, and this idea of kulei alma lo pligi, nobody disagrees, meaning the Tanakama and Ben Tema don't disagree. If you can give him chulin after you've taken trumot and masrot, of course that's what you'll give him. But what if you can't do that? What if that's not available? So then which is more chamur? Mar savar tevel chamur. Umar savar truma chamura. So one of them thinks that the tevel is more chamur, and one of them thinks that truma is more chamur. Why? Mar savar tevel chamur, aval truma chazia the kohen. Tevel is chamur, but truma is something that is fit for a kohen. So what does that mean? Why does that make it less chamur? Why is truma less chamur than tevel?
because there's at least one class of people that can eat it, as is.
As opposed to the tavel, which
Nobody can eat,
Nobody
including the
can
Kohen.
eat.
nobody can eat. Okay, so this is marsavar tevel chamur. So right in the Mishnah, that would be bentema, because bentema says you give truma and not tevel. So he must think that tevel is chamur. So why does he think it's chamur? Tevel is chamur because no one can eat tevel, but at least a Kohen could eat tevel. So, in other words, we started off earlier in this discussion when the Gemara said you feed him hakal. So what we said about hakal meant that I'll feed him the one that has the lesser punishment associated with it. There seems to be an assumption here that tevel and truma are actually the same in terms of punishment. We'll get into this, but that seems to be the implication, because otherwise it wouldn't be, I wouldn't have this question. So it must be that I can't determine this based on their relative punishments. And so I have to use other criteria. So Ben Tema is going to say, I'm going to use a different criteria because mitzad zeh, they're both the same, but I still have to make a choice. So he says, I'll say tevel is chamur because no one can eat tevel, but truma, at least the kohen can eat it. Umar savar, so the Tanakam is going to hold, no, truma chamura. Truma is more chamur. Aval tevel, efshar litkune. Tevel is something that I can fix. What does he mean?
You could take truma and now everybody can eat it.
And then everybody can eat it. Okay, so you see, we can you can break this down into philosophical disagreements. In the case, Marsavar Tevel Chamur, Marsavar Truma Chamura. So, according to Ben Tema, who says that Tevel is Chamur, he's concerned about the state of the food as is. What is it right now? Right now, no one can eat the Tevel, but at least a Kohen can eat Truma. So there's more heter associated with the Truma than there is with the Tevel. And Marsavar, that Truma is Chamura. Why? Because right now, only a Kohen can eat it, no one else can eat it. But Tevel, I could make it, in the future, I could make it mutar for everybody. Even though right now it's not mutar. Go ahead.
So the machloket is about the criterion for by which criterion you judge these two possibilities.
Yes. And so this second idea that Tevel of Charlit Kune, we have this idea elsewhere in halacha that sometimes I look at something based on what its future either will be or could be. And there are various examples of this. So one of them that comes up is in Menachot. It says Kol hara'ui lebila kibalui dami. Anything that's, when you make a korban mincha, right? Mincha belula b'shemen, right? We are familiar with this term, right? When you make menachot, you have to mix the oil with the flour. So for certain halachic purposes, once you pour the oil with the flour, even though you have not yet mixed it up, for certain halachic purposes, it's as if it's already mixed up. And it could be, so we could say, so even though it isn't yet done, it hasn't actually been done, for certain halachic purposes, it's as if it's done. Another example from a completely different place would be, let's say you have a shore, right? You have an ox that killed, and now it's going to be, if an ox kills a human being, there's a court case, right? It's brought to Beit Din, and the Beit Din is going to judge it. Beit Din judges that this animal is chayav mita. So from the time of the psak din that the animal has to be put to death, even if you slaughter that animal with a shchita kshera, it's still considered to be treifa, because from the moment it got a psak din that it's asur, right? The moment it got the psak din, it's as if right that moment it's a treifa, because that's its inevitable outcome. And similar, I mean, along those lines, if a person has been judged to be chayav mitah, they're also considered to be a treifa, right? Anyway, I don't want to get into too many examples, but let's just say, so this idea, tevel of shalit kune, it follows in a certain line of thinking that the tevel has potential to be mutar to everyone, even though it's not right now. So according to that Tana, that's why I'm going to consider it to be Truma Chamura, because its status will never change. It will never be mutar for everybody. But in potentia, the tevel does have the possibility of being mutar for everybody. I'm going to stop here because we need to continue in this discussion. But I think I want to let this settle in, what we've done so far. And hold on one second. And so, yeah, in the last few minutes, I'll just show you something completely unrelated. This is a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, and there's discussion here about Mazal, and this is part of a much longer sugya. There's a lot, and there are other sugyot that deal with Mazal, but the definition of the Mazal is this idea that there are constellations, right? There are formations of stars in the sky, and that maybe they have some effect, or there's some relationship between individuals and constellations. So here, Itmar Rabbi Chanin Omer, Mazal Machkim, Mazal Ma'ashir, V'yesh Mazal Yisrael. This is coming on the heels of a longer discussion, but Rabbi Chanina says that a mazal can make someone wise, a mazal can make somebody wealthy, and there is a mazal for Israel. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ein Mazal Yisrael. This is the quote that we mentioned before. Va'azda Rabbi Yochanan l'ta'amei. Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his reasoning elsewhere. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan minayin shein mazal Yisrael. How do we know? What's the source to say that there is no mazal for Yisrael? Shenemar kol mar Hashem. Here, let's get the pasuk. Kol mar Hashem el derech hagoyim al tilmadu. Right. This is Yirmiyahu being mitnabeh. Thus says the Lord, to the way of the nations do not learn, don't learn the way of the nations. Umeotota shamayim al techatu. Don't be fearful of the signs that have do you hear me now? Uh-oh. No?
Now I hear you.
Okay. Okay. So the pasuk said, the pshat of the pasuk, not go in the ways of the other nations, and do not be fearful of the signs from the heavens, the way that the goyim are, the way that the other nations are. And what's the deal? Goyim yechatzu v'lo Yisrael. Goyim are afraid or should be afraid, but Israel should not be afraid. And then the Gemara brings other people who also have who also agreed with this idea. Ein Mazal Yisrael. And Rashi explains, Yesh Mazal Yisrael. What is Yesh? According to the Rabbi Hanina, Yesh Mazal Yisrael. So what does that mean? Shein tefillah tzedakah mishanet mazal. Davening or giving tzedakah doesn't change your mazal. It doesn't change the way the constellation will affect your life. Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein Mazal Yisrael. Dal yedei tefillah u'zchut mishtamneh mizalo l'tova. So what does it mean, Ein Mazal Yisrael? It means that we have ways of overcoming what would otherwise be our fate as seen in the stars or as dictated by the stars. That's Ein Mazal Yisrael. Again, this is a very like a quick taste of this. Maybe I'll give you the one more. Af Rav Savar, right? So Rav is a contemporary of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav also held Ein Mazal Yisrael. Damar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Minayin Shein Mazal Yisrael. What was Rav's proof text? Shneimar v'yotzei oto hachutza. So this is a pasuk when Hashem does the Brit Bein Avatarim with Abraham. And it says he brings him outside and he shows him, right, he shows him the sky. Amar Avraham lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Avraham said before the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shalom ben beiti yoreshoti. Right, that's the plain shot of what happens. He says, domestic Eliezer is going to be my heir because I don't have any sons. Amar lo love. He says God says to him, no. Ki im asher yetzei mi'ayich. So God assures him, no, it'll be someone who comes from your loins. Your own child is going to be your heir. Amar lefanav, ribono shel olam, master of the universe, sovereign of the universe. Nistakalti bi'itztagniut shali. I looked in my astrology. I looked at my constellations.
Horoscope.
Yeah, or you could say horoscope. Yeah, what we call horoscope. Ve'eni ra'ui l'holid ben. I'm not fit to give birth to a boy. Amarei tzei me'itztagnuyot shelcha she'ein mazal Yisrael. Leave your itztagnuyot, and that's the drasha. Vayotzei oto achutza. That God brought him out, meaning He removed him from the effect of his mazal, and it's as if you have no mazal. So what you see, pshuto shel inyan here, there's another example, but pshuto shel inyan is Chazal, you could say from here, did attribute power to the mazal, but their argument was, Ein Mazal Yisrael. We are not necessarily affected by the power of the mazal because we have other means. We have means of changing of our mazal through tefillah and tzedakah, through doing mitzvot. We can do that, which is not true for the nations. Anyway, that was just to give you a little taste of that. And then, so next week, though, we'll pick up Bezrat Hashem where we left off. If you have time, try to read over what we did today so it helps to sink in. But we see that we have to still we still have to look at Rashi. We have to discuss what, in fact, we should discuss what the relative punishments are for the different things that are mentioned. But I wanted to get to this idea that we can distinguish, that we have this machloket now about which is more chamur based on different approaches, right? Different criteria. How do I decide which is more chamur? So I think that's it for now. Anybody have any last questions or comments? No. Very good. Okay. I hope to see you next week.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.